Great prayer. I pray that whether in a short time or a long time, you would come to know Jesus. I wonder if that's the prayer that you have for your friends, for your family, for the people you see that aren't Christians. And at the moment, we're in the second week of our new series, Powerhouse, Words, Works, and Wonders. And last week, Juliet introduced this series by looking at how, as Jesus' followers, they were sent out to witness, that means bear testimony to, witness to the good news about him. But crucially, before they went and tried that, they were filled with the power of the Spirit. And filled with the power, they were able to go out and share the good news of Jesus in words, in works, and in wonders. And each week in this series, we're going to look at a different story of an ordinary person in the Bible, but who, when was filled with the Holy Spirit, they become a powerhouse in helping others see and encounter Jesus. And so today, we're diving into looking at how we can be a powerhouse of witness with our words, and specifically in how we use our words to tell other people about Jesus. Or if you want the kind of posh word, evangelism, which I know strikes fear into many, but it's just using our words to share our story and the story of Jesus. I don't know how good you are at talking. I don't know how good you are at sharing good news with your friends and family. I don't know whether you're an external processor, that means you need to talk everything out, or whether you keep it all in. But when it comes to talking about Jesus, I wonder how good you are at talking to others about Jesus, about what you believe, about what he's done for you. I mean, are you natural? Do you find it hard? Where do you start? How do you go about introducing the topic in the first place? If you're busy chatting about football, I suppose you can kind of slip in that Jesus plays for Arsenal, and let me tell you about Jesus. Like, it can feel kind of you can have that one for free. It kind of feels unnatural, sort of slipping into those things sometimes. Maybe you feel a bit worried or scared about what your friend might say or what they might think of you. Now, somehow, I feel like I'm not very good at it. I feel like when I try and speak about Jesus outside of this place in normal conversations, there's sometimes I can't quite get my words out. And something happens to me where I stop speaking naturally or normally. My voice kind of changes and I sound like a robot. Or maybe a little bit crazy. And it's not that I don't want to try. It's just that when I do, it comes out all weird. There's a sense in which when I try and speak about Jesus, it's like I don't have my natural voice. Something happens. Well, how do you go about speaking? Like, how do you tell others about him? You might find it really easy. It's not something that comes really naturally to me, although I try and do it. In fact, I remember the first time I really tried to speak to a stranger about Jesus. I was on a train back from a Christian festival, a bit like Focus, and so I was really pumped up. I was really going for it. I'd heard the speakers talk about how you should go out there and tell everyone about Jesus, and I came away thinking, brilliant. And I was on a train back from this festival, and a guy across the aisle caught my eye. And I suddenly thought, now or never, this is the one. And I decided, for whatever reason, I'm not sure why particularly, but I decided that he looked a little bit fed up and sad. I'm not sure he was, I just for some reason decided he was. And I don't know if he was, because I never took the time to find out. But I went up, and I sat opposite him on the train, and I said, I'm so sorry to interrupt. So far, so good. I said, this might sound a bit weird, not the best start, but it'll do. Well, I just wanted to say to you, I think Jesus knows it. He said, pardon? I said, I think Jesus knows that. And what I actually said was, I think Jesus wants you to know that even if no one else loves you, he does. Not great. Not quite what I meant, but it kind of came out. He looked at me, slightly bewildered. He said, thanks. He was very polite. And as we drew up at the station, he promptly got off the train. To make matters worse, I then saw the ticket that he'd left on the table in his hurry to get off, and it showed he wasn't due to get off the train for another 2 stops. I don't know what your experience of talking to others about Jesus has been like. But if we turn to our Bible reading today, we see Paul giving us a bit of a model, a bit of an expert lesson in how we might talk about our faith. Paul wasn't one of Jesus' 12 disciples. This is still going, it's really off-putting. He wasn't one of Jesus' 12 disciples. In fact, he'd spent years trying to stop Jesus' followers from following him, even to the point of killing them for talking about Jesus. But then, as we heard in the reading, Paul has this amazing encounter with Jesus. Paul's going about his business, trying to stop people talking about Jesus. And then suddenly Jesus appears to him and says, no, Saul, I'm now going to call you Paul, and you're going to go and tell others about Jesus. And so Paul ends up witnessing, using his words to witness to many. We read he plants churches, he sees many people come to know Jesus, and he actually writes a big chunk of the New Testament. And so we're still learning from his words today. Why was Paul so good at it? Why was Paul so effective? Well, he'd learned to trust God with his words. Paul had learned that if he just shared his story, God would do the rest. Paul had learned that if he prayed to be full of the power of the Spirit and for opportunities to tell others, then his words would come out, not like that, but they'd come out like that. And as the Spirit filled Paul, it's like it got clearer and a little bit louder. And the power of the Spirit, in the same way this microphone's amplifying my voice, and hopefully coming to you clearly, in the same way, Paul, full of the Spirit, praying for opportunities, whatever he said came across clearly. God helped him to share his story. And the reading today is towards the end of his life, when Paul's been arrested. He's been arrested for speaking about Jesus, and now he has to not just share his faith, but he has to go and stand before 2 rulers and 2 kings, Festus and King Agrippa. And he knows that what he says could get him killed. Talk about being bold in sharing your faith. And so what does Paul say? How does he evangelize to these people and not mess up? Because the stakes are far higher than us being slightly worried about what our friend might think of us. Well, firstly, like I said, he's praying for the power of the Spirit. We know this about Paul. In fact, he's always asking others to pray for him too. And then Paul, if you look at chapter 26, begins to speak. And when he speaks, he doesn't start kind of going through the Alpha course, or he doesn't start going through systematic theology or quoting all these theologians. He just talks from his own experience. He talks about his own relationship with Jesus and what he knows to be true because of it. That's where his power and his passion and his boldness comes from. Not because he's been to a conference, not because he's whipped it up, not because he had a bad experience on a train, he wants to make it better next time, but because he's met Jesus. He knows Jesus. He had an encounter with Jesus, and he wants to share it as the best news in the world. And as he goes on to speak, he gives us a really clear model that we can follow too. And it's going to come up on the screen, but you've got it in front of you on your paper as well. So grab that paper, grab a pen. We're just very quickly going to go through the model now of how Paul probably takes about 10 minutes to share his faith here. With this model he gives us, we can do it in about 30 seconds, I think. The first thing Paul does, and we see him doing it in verse 4 to 11. He says, there was a time in my life when, and then Paul talks about when he hated Christians, when he tried to kill them. There was a time when I didn't believe in Jesus. And so we can start our story, start telling others about Jesus by thinking, how might we answer that question? There was a time in my life when, it might be before you knew Jesus, I don't know, you were lost, I was angry, I was hurting. It might be if you've always grown up knowing Jesus, there's never a time you can't think of, but there might be a time when you remember you needed Jesus and you might go, there was a time when I was scared. It might be one incident. There was a time in my life when, and so how might you fill in that first box? Paul filled it in by saying he hated Christians and he went around the country killing them. He didn't believe in Jesus. But how might you fill that in? There was a time in my life when. And then Paul moves on, and we see in verse 12 to 18, Paul says, then I met Jesus and. Suddenly I met Jesus and he showed me he was real, Paul says. And he set me off telling others about him. There was a time in my life when I was lonely. Then I met Jesus and knew he was my friend. There was a time in my life when I was really angry. Then I met Jesus and I knew I was forgiven. How might you answer that one? There was a time in my life when. Then I met Jesus and then Paul goes on, verse 19 to 23. Now, because of my meeting with Jesus, I'm doing this. I'm going round. I can't contain. I have to tell people about Jesus. I've got a new purpose. I've got a new call. This is my life's work. I long for you, as short or as long as it takes, to come to know him. What is it for you? Now you've met Jesus. Now you've had that encounter with Jesus. How's your life changed? Now I've got a purpose to serve other people. Now I've got a purpose to be kind to others. Now I've got a purpose to think about how I use my money and speak up about justice. It could be anything for you. And then I love when he gets to verse 27, right at the end of his passage. He doesn't just leave it as sharing his story. He turns it back to King Agrippa and says, what about you? Do you believe in the prophets? I know you do. In other words, have you got a story like that? Paul shares his story, tells him how meeting Jesus has changed his life, and invites King Agrippa into a conversation with him. So really quickly, if you fill in all those boxes, that should allow you really simply to share your faith. Use your words in witness. Ask the Spirit to help you. Ask the Spirit to fill you with his boldness and power. There was a time in my life when, then I met Jesus and now I am. What about you? Have you got a story like this? Peter writes, honor Christ and let him be the Lord of your life. Always be ready to give an answer when someone asks you about your hope. Are we ready? Do we know what we would say? It's a really helpful little exercise just to learn. Down at the bottom of your sheet, it just says, I'm praying for opportunities to share my faith with. Maybe just think 3 people that you want to pray that you have opportunities to share your faith with. It might be a friend at school, might be a teacher, might be a co-worker, might be a family member. It might be the guy on the checkouts you see every Wednesday when you go and do your big shop. We can sometimes feel like our story isn't enough or sounds ridiculous when it comes out. But we're not just his witnesses. We're his witnesses filled with his power.